Today, I'd like to talk about a very unique, ambitious, and interesting movie, David Cronenberg's 1983 satire horror film, Videodrome. What is Videodrome? That's the question on the mind of our lead, James Woods as Max Wren. Whether or not we get a satisfying answer to that question is up for debate. Maybe we'll find out as we follow Max through a myriad of hallucinatory experiences, meetings with multiple sects and characters, all attempting to wrangle the immense power of a terrifying new televised technology to their advantage.
I want you, Max. You.
This is a film that offers up a lot of engaging questions and possible interpretations. So let's get started. Max Wren runs Civic TV Channel 83, a fly-by-night cable outfit during the time when having more than 3 viewing options was just starting to become an exciting new reality for Americans. His channel is a bit different, however.
Your television station offers its viewers everything from softcore pornography to hardcore violence. Why?
Civic TV is not unlike the nascent form of Cinemax and HBO before they became respectable, and we see Max Wren reviewing some of this potential material. Perhaps he'll buy it and broadcast it. Softcore pornography back when the pretense of respectability still mattered, and it was necessary to contrive some kind of absurd scenario around exhibitionist films with sex and nudity.
Show me the last one.
Wakarimasen?
Number 13.
But Max, you won't understand anything. Everything is set up in the first 2.
My audience ain't gonna see the first 2 shows. Now show me the last one.
But nothing is catching Wren's attention. It's all too soft.
Looking for something that'll break through, something tough.
His tastes and preferences for hardcore material are escalating. Enter Harvey, a pirate of the airways who has unscrambled a mysterious video feed coming from Malaysia. It's called Videodrome, and it's a rather terrifying display of torture and depravity. Somewhat improbably, Wren is under the impression that this is a television show of some kind.
Absolutely brilliant. I mean, look, there's almost no production costs. You can't take your eyes off it. It's incredibly realistic. Where do they get actors who can do this?
During my first viewing, and I imagine this was the same for many others, the thought that ran through my head was, no, you idiot, this isn't some avant-garde show. You're picking up a kind of snuff mafia video or dictatorial government torture network. And the film had the option to go this way, to become a more straightforward thriller uncovering and exposing a criminal enterprise with a sadomasochistic edge. But Videodrome chooses to go someplace much weirder. It's not hard to see Wren as a character stand-in for Cronenberg, the public-facing Cronenberg of the early 80s who spent just as much time discussing the merits and themes of his films as he did defending them against detractors who saw his movies and the films of his contemporaries, John Carpenter, Tobe Hooper, etc., as increasing in brutality, taking glee in dismemberment, murder, and horrific imagery. This was seen as a contemporary problem by many, Roger Ebert foremost amongst them.
The newspaper ads for these films are bold in the way they suggest terror, but in no way in many cases do the ads really prepare you for the kind of explicit violence we end up getting on the screen. Decapitations are not uncommon, and repeated stabbing shots of all parts of women's bodies are grotesquely routine.
There is a difference between movies which are violent but entertaining and movies that are gruesome and despicable. There is a difference between a horror movie and a freak show.
Wren also spends time defending himself against such attacks in very similar forums. Despite what you might think as evidenced by Cronenberg's filmography, I believe he was using Videodrome as a means by which to wrestle with this question himself. Oftentimes, Wren does a poor job defending his trade, and when he does, it comes across as half-hearted.
I care enough, in fact, to give my viewers a harmless outlet for their fantasies and their frustrations. And as far as I'm concerned, that's a socially positive act. It's just torture and murder. No plot, no characters. Very, very realistic. I think it's what's next.
Then God help us.
Better on TV than on the street.
Excuse me?
Like he knows he's peddling something unsanitary. Wren meets the sultry Nikki Brand, played by Debbie Harry. Nikki is a radio talk show host who helps weepy listeners navigate their familial dramas. She joins Max on some kind of placid afternoon show where she initially argues against Max's sensationalist project.
Well, I think we live in overstimulated times. We crave stimulation for its own sake. We gorge ourselves on it. We always want more, whether it's tactile, emotional, or sexual. And I think that's bad.
But Max has her figured out, in a way, and puts on some of his slimy but lovable charm.
You know what Freud would have said about that dress.
And he would have been right. I admit it. I live in a highly excited state of overstimulation.
And that's an understatement. Nikki takes pleasure from pain, to an extent that Max isn't yet comfortable with.
Nikki, don't.
Maybe on TV, but not in real life. I imagine Nikki's fetish for pain would have been somewhat shocking to audiences of the time, as not many films had dealt with this reality. Perhaps her interest in domination and humiliation would have been fairly foreign had you not seen something like The Night Porter almost 10 years earlier. Nikki is fascinated by Videodrome, and shockingly she wants to be part of the action, as it were. Almost as if to suggest that television has a desensitizing effect on its viewers, Ren balks at Nikki's willingness to participate.
Listen to me. What? I want you to stay away from it. Those Mondo weirdo video guys, they've got unsavory connections. They play rough. Rougher than even Nikki Brand wants to play. Do you understand me?
Sounds like a challenge.
Much like a pornography enjoyer might react if his sister or girlfriend tried out for the video casting couch. Jay Giles Band had a song about this. It's as if to say, what happens on TV isn't real. The people aren't real. Their pain and humiliation aren't real. As long as I'm safe in my living room, acting as voyeur. Something unsettling begins to happen to Max. He begins to see strange things, or strange things begin to happen to him. His television breathes. It grows tumescent veins and pulsates in his living room. He sees a vision of Nikki on TV and follows her mouth into the screen. It swallows him. He awakes in fright, which leads Ren to visit the domicile of the sage Professor Brian Oblivion, the cathode ray mission. Whatever is going on in this converted church has the air of cult-like devotion. It's not clear exactly what vagrants and other devotees are doing or how they spend their time here other than by watching television. Ren had encountered Oblivion before, but he was too busy flirting with Nikki Brandt to engage with the professor and his television gimmick.
The television screen has become the retina of the mind's eye. Of course, Oblivion is not the name I was born with. That's my television name. Soon, all of us will have special names.
Soon we'll all have special names. Predictions like this add to the legacy of Cronenberg's film as a very prescient work with predictive powers, very ahead of its time. Of course, we didn't all end up having special television names, but we do have Twitter handles and avatars on message boards. Many people with special names engage with my work. The basis for the idea of the character of Brian Oblivion comes from the famous 20th century Toronto professor Marshall McLuhan, best known for his insight, "The medium is the message," as well as the idea of a coming global village in which cultural and regional barriers would be stripped away by the onset of mass media. McLuhan's other salient observation on the ways in which media relates to the body fit comfortably alongside any discussion of David Cronenberg, but especially Videodrome. In his book Understanding Media, The Extensions of Man, McLuhan basically outlines the kind of cyborg hypothesis. You've heard this one before. Different media works as an extension of our senses. The wheel is an extension of the foot, as it enhances our ability to move. Clothing as an extension of the skin. The telephone as an extension of the voice, camera, the eye, and so on.
Any new medium changes the image we have of our own bodies. For example, the motor car is a vast extension of our feet, and it turns you into a paraplegic in a powered armchair, as it were. But it changes completely the image we have of our bodies. With television, the image we have of our bodies is profoundly altered by the fact that the image goes inside us.
The aim of Oblivion's character seems to be to accelerate this trend. Bianca, Oblivion's daughter, explains to Max that the purpose of the vagrants coming in to watch television is to help them.
In their case, Mr. Wren, it's not a style. It's a disease forced on them by their lack of access to the cathode ray tube.
You think a few doses of TV are going to help them?
Watching TV will help patch them back into the world's mixing board.
In Understanding Media, McLuhan introduced something he called the narcissist trap, derived from the Greek myth of Narcissus, who fell in love with his own reflection. McLuhan felt that by utilizing these extensions and becoming reliant upon them without realizing the extent to which we were farming out our own biological perceptions, we would become desensitized to our natural environment and disconnected from other forms of sensory experience. We would essentially become handicapped by our own technology. Bianca's mixing board idea can be interpreted in two ways. First, these people could have been so overstimulated by television that their ability to reconnect with their natural perceptions is totally shot. They can now only connect to community and a feeling of being part of a wider world by plugging in to TV. Or maybe they're all tapping into something higher. Maybe they are early adopters of this global mixing board. Maybe we'll all need to be plugged in from time to time in the future.
And I thought, what would a kind of Salvation Army kind of organization that was invented by Marshall McLuhan be like? I think you can see in the cathode ray mission an adumbration of those programs that are designed to bring the internet to every impoverished country in order to connect its citizens with the world, to plug them back in, as Bianca Oblivion says, plug them back into the world's mixing board.
Oblivion's cathode ray mission has cult-like overtones, a theme prevalent in a lot of Cronenberg's early work. From the cult of Oliver Reed in The Brood, the psychoplasmics movement that uses intense role-playing to expel negative emotions that manifest physically as sores, to the dueling bands of good and bad psychics in the film Scanners. Bianca explains Videodrome to Max. It's not a show, it's a signal.
But the Videodrome signal, the one that does the damage, it can be delivered under a test pattern, anything.
It can be carried by anything. Her father believed it would help advance society's interconnectedness, another stage in the evolution of television and man side by side.
He saw it as the next phase in the evolution of man as a technological animal. When he realized what his partners were going to use it for, he tried to take it away from them.
So, like in Scanners, there are good users of Videodrome and bad users of Videodrome.
We make inexpensive glasses for the Third World and missile guidance systems for NATO. We also make Videodrome, Max. And as I'm sure you know, when it's ready for the marketplace, things will never be quite the same again.
Cronenberg had an intuition that power and influence was fought out in the margins of society, while the rest of us are unaware as warring minority interests work to shape our collective future. Like many influential movements in the 20th century, the Brian Oblivion cult of video is driven by someone who is already dead, whose thoughts and teachings are preserved not in text like Karl Marx, the Founding Fathers, or Jesus Christ, but instead on videotape.
Brian Oblivion died quietly on an operating table 11 months ago. I keep him alive as best I can. He had so much to offer.
Max is, in a sense, sort of Orpheus in the underworld, if you will. He has a way of bumping into the secret lives of characters that he has in his own life taken for granted so far. He deals with these people all the time in this kind of underground world of video and porn and so on. And they're all sort of hustlers, and they all have a product to hawk, etc. But they all seem to have a life beyond what he knew of them. So it's, in a sense, a mystery story. A lot of it it's kind of, in that sense, a precursor to Blade Runner, to Ridley Scott's terrific film based on the Philip K. Dick novella. Your character is constantly learning about other worlds that exist from the one that you experience or think that you know about.
Of course, there are a lot of parallels between Cronenberg and the work of novelist Philip K. Dick, foremost amongst them for our video today, the idea of half-life in Dick's novel Ubik. In the novel, very similar to the concept of Brian Oblivion surviving through video, characters are kept in a sort of suspended animation after death, where their advice can be solicited post-mortem. Of course, there is a diminishing effect to this. I'm sure you guys maybe are even passingly familiar with the idea of preserving somebody's consciousness via AI, where their opinions on current day subjects could be divined by digging back into their old writings and public speaking. This is obviously a very topical and salient discussion, and it was presaged here in Videodrome with the idea of Oblivion being preserved via videotape.
I had a brain tumor, and I had visions. I believe the visions caused the tumor and not the reverse. I could feel the visions coalesce and become flesh. Uncontrollable flesh.
The idea of something non-physical, like speaking or engaging with media, having the ability to produce biological changes, is carried over from The Brood and Scanners, as Ren develops the rather iconic, but particularly off-putting, stomach slit. Perhaps another hallucination or manifestation of Videodrome, like Oblivion's tumor. The vaginal comparisons are unavoidable, other than being a creepy but indelible practical effect from Rick Baker. What does this really mean? Well, let's look at what Ren does with his new orifice. Earlier, Ren had unwrapped a handgun. Either he took it out of storage or bought it. The paranoia creeping in, he felt he needed protection. His first instinct is to smuggle the gun into his new stomach slit. Slit being the operative slang term on the set when it came time for Woods to undergo the arduous makeup procedure. When Max is indoctrinated by the sinister Barry Convex, Oblivion's former partner, they use his new stomach as a VHS player, inserting the tape as a mean to manufacture Max's programming. It turns out that Max's radio pirate Harlan was a traitor, enlisting Max by exposing him to the Videodrome signal.
Why?
To get you involved.
Now, Max will be their slave. He'll kill his business partners and wipe out Bianca Oblivion so that the work of the Videodrome signal can commence on the general population.
It really does work on just about anybody.
Anybody who watches it, Max.
Their aim? To eradicate smutty material and the idle pleasures of liberal entertainment.
Why would anybody watch a scum show like Videodrome? Why did you watch it, Max? Business reasons.
Aims which Cronenberg categorized as a moral majority effort.
Now you and this cesspool you call a television station, and your people who wallow around in it, and your viewers who watch you do it, you're rotting us away from the inside.
Interestingly, Max is able to subvert his brainwashing after discovering the gun he had hidden inside himself earlier. It fuses to his hand, and he begins the work of destroying Videodrome. I find it particularly interesting that both times when Max is to receive programming from men via his feminine orifice, he is instructed to open up to me.
Open up to me.
I want you to open up, Max. Open up to me.
Is Max in touch with his feminine side? Critic Robin Wood had long dismissed Cronenberg as a sexist, taking particular umbrage with the idea of Samantha Egger's character in The Brood, her evil babies wreaking havoc on her benighted husband, a biological extension of her mental rage. The film, admittedly, a personal exploration of Cronenberg's divorce from his first wife. But is Videodrome a coded apology for past transgressions against feminism? Is Max in Videodrome an avatar for women now that he too has a vagina of sorts? And in turn, a stand-in for Cronenberg's own attitudes? And is his discovery of the gun within, as it were, an analogy for the power women can wield against men? The ability to topple patriarchy? We see, too, at the end, Max taking orders from Nikki. Nikki, thought dead. Now seemingly alive in a series of hallucinations. Is Nikki a force for feminism and change, or simply another femme fatale who manipulates and leads our hero to an early demise? Cronenberg's films are full of noir-tinged femme fatale women, like Allegra Geller in Existenz, Claire Neveu in Dead Ringers, Helen Remington in Crash. Women who are sometimes duplicitous, combustible, who lead the male character into strange new worlds of fetish or possibility. They awake something within the men that often destroys them.
Is Nikki drawing him into something, a part of himself that would be better left unexplored? And then the question is, does this movie draw its audience into arenas that are better left unexplored? And of course, that's the whole question. The movie is really looking at itself in a way that I don't think I had done quite before this.
Critic Carrie Rickey makes the point that one could get a brain cramp trying to tease out whether a Cronenberg scenario privileges repression or expression. As in, when you see the biological changes enacted on Max, is this a welcome next stage? A biological leap with technology via integration? Or is this a doomed scenario of lost humanity, or de-evolution, and horrible mutation? I think Cronenberg sums up well our relationship to technology, or his opinion on it, recently while discussing his new movie Crimes of the Future.
But for me, technology has always been ultra-human, a complete extension of what we are. Our fist becomes, a missile, we throw a rock, we see, we hear. So technology also becomes what we are, for the good and the bad. And you see it with every new technology. You see the internet, you see social media. It's great, it's wonderful, and it's horrible and horrifying at the same time. Brings out the worst in us and also the best.
I think it's safe to say there are no real answers beyond your own interpretation of this text. Even Cronenberg is either unwilling or unable to unspool this crazy movie, and Woods, though obviously one of the sharpest and most intelligent actors out there, whose audio commentary on the Criterion disc is undoubtedly one of the best I've heard from an actor, isn't exactly sure. But to him, that's part of the fun.
He loves the idea of the notion of other layers of reality. It's not what you see is what you get. It's what you see is a lie, and what you get is always many twisted, ironic, convoluted layers beyond what you think you're going to get. He really is asking phenomenally intriguing questions and not necessarily giving answers. I mean, David almost eschews the notion of answering these questions. He just loves to ask them. And I think that that's a noble venture.
The artist is always a jump ahead of technology and is engaged really in giving you images of what sort of effects it's likely to have upon you later on.
Your body has already done a lot of changing, but that's only the beginning. The beginning of the new flesh.
But are we letting technology run amok? Is it after all that, after watching the violent and horrific Videodrome, that Max changes forever, arguably for the worst? If Nikki is lying and the new flesh is an illusion, then Max is simply dead. If she's telling the truth, then what?
Long live the new flesh.
Has he achieved immortality inside the world of the video? Is that a place that we want to be? I like David Cronenberg because he's obviously a very intelligent filmmaker and a very adept one, though he is in conversation with his sort of subconscious id that allows his more dense and confusing and disturbing dreams to worm their way onto the screen. In an interview with Cinema Fantastique magazine, Cronenberg even made overtures to the idea that his scripts almost write themselves. Like he writes them in a kind of fuse state. He spoke with the interviewer about how, after reading his first draft of Videodrome, it had come out, quote, more extreme than I had wanted to see myself. Which leads me to believe that he just sort of pours out these sort of Freudian nascent images that appear in his head. Cronenberg's films are generally very cold. They're not very sentimental. But in the way he's able to channel an often somewhat obscene, dreamlike body and sexual imagery to the screen, that sort of makes sense on a nascent kind of subconscious level. You see these bizarre images, and they're striking because they seem familiar. It's almost sort of like their ancestral knowledge. And in that way, I think his films are very human.